Hey there, welcome to Season 4 of the Echo Podcast, where I sit down with two guests and we talk out our agreements and disagreements on important questions that young adults face about life, theology, culture, and the Seventh-day Adventist Church. I'm excited this week because we have two guests with us. One is a good friend of mine, Caleb Isley. He is the founder of Humans of Adventism. He's involved in several different ministry capacities and currently works with the Oregon Conference doing something similar along those lines for them and working with social media and running their social media presence. And so really excited to have him on in his experience with stories and really listening to people and embracing their experiences and their stories. And also we have Henry Johnson, who's also a good friend of mine. He is the young adult director of the Carolina Conference and is someone who's been in pastoral ministry for several years, has been actually in multiple denominations throughout his life, and so he brings quite a bit of experience and knowledge with him as well. And so I'm really looking forward to you experiencing some of what I get to experience as friends with them, and also with Henry, as he and I host a separate podcast called A Beautiful Faith. And so excited to hear everything from them today. My name is Ryan Becker. Welcome to Echo. Let's get started.
This episode of the Echo Podcast is sponsored by Southern Adventist University.
Today will be fun. This is gonna be a good time.
No, it's not.
I'm ready.
I'm not ready.
I'm very ready.
All right. Well, now
I'm not.
This ship is already sinking, so
It's floating.
We're already off to a great start. If you haven't caught on, we're talking about disagreeing today, disagreements, and
we're not.
how to what disagreeing currently is, and how it can be, how we can do it better, how we can do it worse. I don't know. We'll land where we land, I think. But I'm hoping that this one, while being a serious topic, one that really, really does impact a lot of people, don't disagree with that. You're wrong. While I think it is a serious topic, I think we can go about this in a way that is pretty lighthearted and we can have a good time here. So I'm really grateful to have both of you on for this conversation because I think both of you work in spaces professionally and personally where this is a normal thing. And so I'm curious even to kind of hear how that experience colors your answers here. So I think the first thing that we need to do is kind of establish like how we see the current reality of the current state of things, because I think that will provide a good framework for understanding our answers moving forward, right? So what would you say is the kind of current culture or current societal idea around arguing and debating? And yes, I know social media is going to come into this.
Politics.
And politics. So yes, go for it.
I mean, the current culture of disagreement is if anything is said that is not in line with my current way of thinking, it is a danger and must be exterminated.
That's.
I mean, literally. Disagreement now actually has lost a lot of its potency because disagreement now is just something I'm supposed to do to maintain my identity in a group. It's no longer something that comes about because of active listening skills. I don't think we actually listen to disagree. We just disagree. You open your mouth. I wait for you to finish. You're wrong.
Yeah.
Right.
Or I look for the one. This happens in Facebook comments a lot, but I look for the one sentence that I can poke at and ignore every other point that you've made, in order to discount every other point that you've made, right? And topple your whole argument. But very much so, it's I hear a lot, and definitely in the political spectrum, I hear a lot of anything that comes from Democrats or anything that comes from Republicans, like it's all automatically bad. If a Democrat has suggested it or a Republican has suggested it, then I will not listen to it whatsoever. There is no value in anything that side of the aisle has to offer. And so it is very much disagreement tied to identity and staying connected with a group.
Well, even that phrase, the other side of the aisle, it implies that I must maintain the space. Right? Disagreement is a necessary component to keep the space between us, because to draw close to one another is a threat.
Yeah. Because I don't want to become more like you.
Yes.
In other words, I don't want to close the gap between us, but I want you to make the cross. I want you to jump across that gap and be on my side. That's what I want, but I don't want to close that gap at all, because then I might risk coming over to your side, or we may risk our side being infected with whatever your ideas are. Definitely have seen that on a regular basis.
Yeah, I think the pattern seems to be very all or nothing, right? Like there is a almost I describe it like sports teams, right? Are you on my team or are you on another team? Because there's no like shared people between sports teams, right? And instead of looking at everything in a million pieces, at everything as components that contribute to a worldview, it's either you're with me or against me. You know, and that's true not just of politics, but with a lot of church culture and religious culture, right? Like I've seen where we can't learn from someone who is not us, or we can't be challenged to grow. Someone can't be right or have authority on something unless they are us. And the truth is, Christianity comes from a legacy of people who disagree with the church, right? Really what the pattern is disagreeing with humanity in order to agree with God, right? It's constantly wherever there's something, a pattern in the world, whether that's in our church or not, it's being willing to disagree. But I think right now we're just living in this cultural moment where almost no matter what you're looking at, even if it's Star Wars, I mean, it's you're with me or against me. If you don't agree with me, you're evil or bad, or you know, like, or if we have a major disagreement, there's nothing I can learn from you. I think that's a really dangerous piece of this.
In a sense, could we say that we're talking about the wrong thing? Our society is at a moment where it's moved away from disagreement to argument.
Yeah, I
because they have similarities, but they're different.
Yeah. Well, okay, so I do agree with that, ironically. The question then is, do you think, and I think this may seem like a dumb question to someone, but I think it's always worth asking this question. Is this shift or this cultural moment and our observation of it, do you think that is a good thing, a bad thing? Is there any redeemable, or if it's bad, is there any redeemable qualities to it or any good that's come from it, and vice versa? And I'm fine if the answer, like my answer is no, I don't think it's a good thing. But, and I think there might be someone that hears this and goes, why did you even ask that? But I do think it's important to analyze stuff like this as much as possible in order to know why you are where you are. So do you think good thing, bad thing?
I want to take my own advice here and not view this as good thing or bad thing, right? It's not black or white. It's not one thing or the other. There are pieces that are helpful, and there are things that are, like, there are negative things that are coming from the seed of something great. We're at a point right now where more voices are being empowered to be heard than ever.
Yes,
and
the engagement part is
good. A lot of these disagreements, especially politically and socially, are coming from people who haven't had the opportunity to be heard for a long time. There are very real things that need to be accomplished by people saying how we're doing things is really damaging and harmful. That's a good thing. Right? Those disagreements are coming from a good place. The desire to be better, the desire to treat people better and to be better as humanity. How they're shaping into this kind of just very polarized, very like with me or against me kind of thing, I think can be very unhealthy. But to say that like there's no good about this, I think is not my opinion. I think that we need to have just a more critical mind about it. And I think we need to be able to take the best of all of these conversations and use them to grow. I do think we could be doing it in a much healthier way than we do, though.
Yeah, I would agree. I agree with that. And I think I'm going to do a lot of agreeing this episode. I'm suspicious of it. And I like that you're looking for kind of good things to pick out of it and bad things to pick out of it too. And that's why I asked the question, like, we don't get there if we don't analyze it and ask the question. And most people would just settle on this is good or bad, and that's it. So, Henry, your thoughts here?
Well, again, yeah, to settle on it just being good or bad is to have the same shallowness that's preventing us from communicating to start with. Right? Like you said, just choosing the one thing. Kind of going off what Caleb was saying, I think the engagement that we're seeing now is a positive thing. And to a sense, it's almost another opportunity to make a comment about stop focusing on the tool as much as the problem behind it that it's just being used by. So in other words, for example, I can remember even before these debates that a lot of it is tied into social media. And I remember a lot of people used to say social media was bad because everyone's just stuck in their phones and you don't see each other and you don't communicate. And they're like, see, technology's bad or whatever. And I used to think back to my grandfather, and the only time I saw him, and I'm old enough to remember before the smartphone and everything else, and the only time I used to see him at breakfast was when he lowered the newspaper to grab his coffee cup, and then he disappeared behind the newspaper again. That's not a phone, but it was the exact same thing, right? So all social media and the phone is just another form of technology to deal with the same problem. So I don't think this disagreement wasn't absent somehow prior to the modern era. I just think we weren't as exposed to as many people. It was much easier to stay in your little group, right? Because I stayed in my own little town or my own state or my own whatever. Well, now the world is your oyster, as the phrase goes. Now I can communicate in real time with someone half a globe away with a totally different life perspective, and in real time, I don't even have the benefit of the pause between event and knowledge. Right?
Yeah,
it's kind of like
correct.
part of why they say politics is so poisoned now is because we live in the 24-hour news network age. Instead of you could make a decision and you had 12 hours to figure out how you were going to frame an explanation as to why before everybody heard about it.
Yeah.
Well, now I can sit on my phone and watch, an impeachment in live time, and somebody makes a comment, and I'm making a comment.
We process in real time. That's exactly what happens.
Or really, we don't process. And I think that would be the negative. We react in real time, but processing by definition requires time.
Well, no, that's what I'm saying. Like the reactions, typically those reactions would have been confined to only the people close to you, like around you physically or in your own head. And now those reactions, which normally would be a part of the processing, happen on Twitter, on Facebook, on Instagram. Like they happen. We're seeing this, or we saw this with kind of the and this is not in a bad way, but we saw this with the death of Kobe Bryant and his daughter, as kind of a whole nation and many people around the world mourned the death of a hero, and you saw that processing and grieving happening publicly and on social media. Like that's what I mean when I say processed in real time, is those reactions are no longer, those reactions come across as already processed, but in reality those reactions are the processing, if that makes sense.
Well, and that's an important thing to mention too about this culture of disagreement or arguing. You hit on something interesting. We assume they're already processed thoughts. But usually how we communicate is kind of like the old adage, I like to think out loud. A lot of people that know me, I think out loud. And so I say a lot of things that wouldn't be how I would finish phrasing it once I'm done figuring it out. That wouldn't be how I would then present it. In a study, it's kind of stream of consciousness, though. Sometimes my sermons are like that, unfortunately, for people. But,
you should be on a podcast.
Yeah, I should. It would be beautiful. And I have faith we could do it. So, but yeah, my point is that would help us know how to actually work through it, is if we could pause long enough to go, I don't know for certain that this is their final. See, because we approach it like their final immovable. And so, therefore, I need the battering ram to break through the wall and just prove to them how dumb they are, how whatever else, and just run through that. Well, what if less of viewing it as a castle that must be defended at all costs, I realize this might just be someone's initial reaction to something, and it's raw and it's unprocessed. And because it's unprocessed, I probably shouldn't just go at it.
Yeah. If you realize that, it's a little bit easier to slow down. The one thing that I actually do slightly disagree with what you said is that I actually think while social media has opened the doors to meet more people, it's also the way that algorithms work, the way that Facebook groups, like the shift from Facebook to really aim at developing their groups and smaller communities. Twitter being able to make lists of specific people that you would follow and interact with, or specific people that would show up on your feed. I actually think there's been a lot of contributing to siloing and isolating people too. It's almost easier now to stay in your bubble ideologically, because you can easily say, you can just check a box to say, I don't want to follow this person, I want to block this person, I don't want to engage with their content, I only want to engage with the content that I like and that I see. Podcasts, subscribing to it rather than turning on the radio and hearing whatever is on the radio. Granted, you could turn off the radio, I guess, but there were a lot of people that would just play the radio because they don't want to drive in silence, or that's just what's on and they accept it, right? There's a lot more individual control and curation that happens now that does, I think, that has, which is a good thing overall, but I think it has very much contributed to further isolation, further siloing, and further kind of bubbling up, so to speak.
It's almost an overcorrection to the problem. Everyone realized that it was getting visceral, that it was getting nasty, and so we've overcorrected by going, the way to solve it is not to learn how to interact with other people that may disagree with you. The way to solve it is you never have to interact with somebody that disagrees with you. So now we're in echo chambers instead of, really learning to hear one another.
I think this is just a return to how society was. For example, if you talk with, people who grew up before the internet, some of them will tell you the time that they grew up was golden. They were surrounded by people who supported, and their ideas weren't challenged. I mean, everyone around them agreed with them. It was a great time to be alive. People just got along. You talk to somebody else of a different cultural background, and the same time period could have been a nightmare.
Yeah.
Right? Their understanding of the world was put together by the people around them, and what a lot of people don't realize is that they were surrounded by people in a societally made silo, not from media exclusively, but also by segregation,
Geography.
by systematic stuff that we intentionally created to keep people, even based on their income, right? Depending on what neighborhood you lived in, you're surrounded by people in a similar income to you.
Yeah.
And what we're seeing is a technological version of maybe a return to what already existed I can choose to surround myself with this.
And I think a good example of the system thing is actually just the other day I was listening to a podcast with, I believe his name is Dr. Emerson Gray White, or Emerson Gray, but he's a white guy who moved. He felt this call from God, very audible, very clear, decades ago, to leave his suburban white neighborhood and live in what is a majority black neighborhood. And he had to move out of, I think he was in Minnesota. He had to move to an entirely different state in order to make that happen, actually. And one thing that he mentioned in this interview was that people, when they're buying houses, they look for good neighborhoods and they look for higher property values
and school districts.
Districts, right? So what ends up happening is they want to live in these certain places, so these certain places end up attracting a certain type of person, which happens to be white people. In many cases, it ends up being white people, because if there's a lot of black people in the area, this has been shown to be the case, that there are a lot of families that won't choose to live in a majority black neighborhood. And so the property values go up where the white people are, and it becomes this self-fulfilling prophecy, or this cycle, this self-sustaining cycle that happens. And there was actually a study done. He also referenced a study done that said where schools would say, or where parents would say, yeah, I would choose a home based on a school district where the test scores are good and the test scores are high, right? And then they actually studied this, and they found that even among districts where test scores were higher than in the traditionally white district, the family still chose the traditionally white district over living in the area where the test scores were higher. In other words, there was more to it. And because of that self-fulfilling cycle, or like it contributes more to the to that divide, to that aisle. And it does, I think that is an example of what you mean when you say these kind of systemic things that happen, and these cultural things that happen that we may not even be completely cognizant of happening. And no, I'm not just lambasting white people. That's not what I'm doing there. But it is a real life example. Sure. Like we can back that up with studies and research that.
Yeah, then people will disagree with when you post it.
Correct.
Because they'll find the one thing that
the one line. And my way of combating that, honestly, has been, and I do the exact opposite now. I look for the one thing that I can agree with And this catches people off guard all the time, but I like to at least start any response that I have with, hey, you actually made a really good point here. Here happens to be where, I may disagree or diverge, but like, this is a really good point. I think that's a value, and I think both of us can hold on to that. And then I may go into the rest of my thing, but I try to open that up because opening up with affirmation is a better way to win people than opening up with criticism.
Yep.
Just factually. And on Facebook, where you have less of an interaction or less of a, connection with the person that you're often arguing with, it is really important. I think it's even more important to open with an affirmation, to open with an acknowledgement of, hey, I like what you're saying here, but here happens to be where I diverge, and here's why, or whatever, and really explaining it. And what that says to me, and this is what I wish that the culture of arguing and debating would be, is, as a friend of mine has put it, a debate is two people arriving at truth together. And in order to do that, you both have to understand that truth is something that, like, neither of us has the full truth. That is an assumption that you have to go with. That there's at least there is a possibility that neither of us has the full truth, which means that maybe there are pieces that can fit together.
Yeah.
And so a debate is finding out where those pieces fit together, not trying to only identify the pieces that don't fit. It's like trying to put together a puzzle by only putting together the pieces, or only identifying the pieces that don't fit together, but never actually trying to fit anything. And that understanding of debating and arguing has changed the entire way I disagree with people, and it's made me a more respectful person, I hope. At least I feel, but I don't know. Maybe the people I've disagreed with and argued with can disagree with that down the line. I don't know. Maybe none of them listen to anything I do because I've been so disrespectful. I don't know. We'll find out. But yeah, what are your, I guess, what are your thoughts on then, I guess, in the church, agreeing, disagreeing, and how that tends to impact us moving forward, even as a denomination, right? Within Adventism, there are big ticket items that we tend to disagree on and that cause a lot of division. And we're actually seeing this with the Methodist denomination right now, and they're going through a literal split where they have offered basically a severance package to the traditional group of Methodists that don't believe in LGBTQ plus, are non-affirming and are not okay with them being in ministry as well. And the Methodist denomination has said, no, we do actually agree with this. So here's a severance package. Here's money, and here's what you need in order to start your own, denomination. So we're seeing divisions, not necessarily to that extent in our own, but people have been saying there are hints of that for years. So what's your perspective from within our denomination and within our church with disagreeing and agreeing and these kind of arguments and debates? I know it's a broad question. Have fun.
I'm going to say, first of all, right off the bat, I hope nobody would disagree to this. We need to learn to disagree better. If any group of people should be interested in understanding and giving grace and being patient, Christ-like attributes, it should be the church. But often I find that the church tends to be a place that jettisons it faster because of these concepts of truth and defending truth and good versus evil and whatnot, and we just go right at it. And so, yeah, my perspective is definitely in a lot of these issues that have happened in our particular denominational persuasion in the last few years, we just all stink at talking to one another. If it's proved anything to me, we can't communicate. And to be fair, I think it's because we've lost the ability to communicate even at the local level. So I think that we're seeing things filter all the way up, and as in so many things in society, we're fighting the symptom, not the disease. These churches don't just go and hit the split.
Yeah.
There has to be a lot of things that contribute to the point that they're used to being like goodbye. You said goodbye a lot of other places before you got to the point where that happens. So my first thing is I wish we would learn to communicate better. And part of that's going to take better listening skills. Part of that's going to take self-examination. To ask yourself, why am I upset when I disagree with them? Or what about them not viewing things the way I do bothers me so bad? What do I think that, some of it, if I want to go out on a limb here, I think the reason we communicate so poorly and we're having the issues we are is we have bad theology. And I don't mean that in the sense of like 28 fundamental beliefs I don't believe in or whatnot. What I mean by that is we have probably a bad understanding of our own theology. And because we've made a lot of assumptions about things and just repeated phrases and whatever, people don't get it, and they've morphed into different understandings of what truth is, what God cares about or doesn't care about, or what unity means, or what, whatever. And because of this, we're now the church is becoming the church militant instead of the church ministering. Yeah. And I think that's a big reflection on where we are.
Yeah. I even think of the organization, and I'm not trying to make enemies here, but what is it? Christian moms against, I forget what it is, but it's the group of moms that are against like inappropriate television. But we've kind of that is an example of, and I get their intent and what they're trying to do. Like, I'm not against them as a whole idea. What I'm saying is like that idea of just entrenching ourselves and defining ourselves as what we are against already puts us on this, sets us on the foot of, I'm going to disagree with you and look for those opportunities because I am against whatever you're doing already. If I'm against what you're doing, then I'm against who you are. That's what ends up happening.
I'm actually a huge believer in dissent and criticism. I think that the church needs dissent and criticism. What I'm not a believer in is criticism for the sake of criticism, right? I don't think that we should just find reasons to disagree. I don't think that we should disagree the end. I think that whenever you have a problem, you should speak to that problem and then be willing to help change the problem. So I think the same people who are saying, that this is an issue should be able to do what they can to contribute to fixing it. I think somewhere between the people who just don't want you to criticize the church at all and the people who can't stand the church at all is kind of a healthy way of living where you are willing to say, we're doing this wrong, we're being unhealthy, we're damaging people, and I am willing to be part of the solution, whatever that means. And I think it's really dangerous once you start trying to just silence criticism. And I think that if you look at any prophet, any reformer, they have been the dissenters, right? They have been people in a space saying something here is off. God says this, God is like this, we are like this, and that's different. We need to change. As soon as you, and really, if you look at the context surrounding each person, the church did try to silence them. The church did eventually kick them out, persecute them, whatever. And to look at those stories as a church today, we have to ask ourselves, who are we in this story as it plays out again? Are we the church saying, be quiet, we're fine, we're doing it right? Or are we part of the people that are saying, like, let's fix this? Or are we the third option where we're just saying, I hate what's going on here, I hate all of you people, I'm here for destruction. I think analyzing ourselves and how we do things and being willing to say, I will stand up even against my institution if it means standing up for God.
Yeah. This is going to sound twisted, so bear with me. I actually praise God for the people who were able to identify kind of what is either a deal breaker or a significant issue in the church. I praise God for the courage and confidence they had to walk away from church. Because, and this is why I say this. I don't say it because I'm glad they're out of the church. That's not it at all. I think that's a tragedy, and I wish that didn't have to happen. But what it did was that kind of courage awakens the church to an actual problem. The willingness to stand up for something that is right and say, I'm not going to be a part of an institution that does this, or this, whatever this may be, actually helps to awaken the church to say, like, oh, we can't just get away with doing this and people will just disagree and identify still with us, but rather we actually need to do something about this. And so I do praise God for the courage of those people. Obviously, I pray for them and hope that we can, be something that they can identify with again, and that they're willing to follow Christ. And it breaks my heart that we've done anything. And I'm not saying that every reason someone walks away from God is the church's fault, or that that's justified. But I am, I pray for them, and I hope that we can be something again that they would one day be able to identify with. But I do very much praise God for that courage that they do have, and I respect it.
Disagreement is a valuable tool depending on how you wield it. I would go with Caleb. I really would lose respect for any group, institution or otherwise, that doesn't make a safe space for disagreement. And the reason why, several reasons. One, any group I think that doesn't like disagreement is lazy, right off the bat.
Yeah.
Because an absence of disagreement allows me to just coast through life without being forced to have introspection, without being forced to grow, without being forced to be alert.
Yeah.
Basically, no disagreement allows you to sleepwalk. And I guess some people might think that's great if you're sleepwalking into a good place, but if you're heading in a wrong place, sleepwalking to your death isn't so rosy. So, so first of all, it's lazy. B, any group that doesn't allow, doesn't make a safe place or encourage even healthy disagreement, not just go in there and just disagree to disagree. But healthy disagreement is also shortchanging personal growth and corporate growth. Because even, let's put it this way, disagreement doesn't necessarily mean that you're wrong. But disagreement, even if I was 100% right, for someone to disagree with the 100% right that I am, is actually healthy for me. Because if nothing else, it will show me that while what I hold true is right, I might be doing a poorer job of explaining it in a way that people can embrace and benefit from. So just the disagreement alone tells me, maybe I need to rephrase how I'm presenting what is right, or maybe I need to re-demonstrate in different ways that are communicating in a language they understand, this kind of thing, etc. And third and finally, any organization or group that doesn't allow for disagreement is basically inviting people to go somewhere else to engage with disagreement, and they might be engaging in a community that's not going to channel that disagreement to your benefit.
Yeah.
Right? In other words, I would hope the church could be the place of, hey, here's a safe place. Let's disagree, but we're going to help you use that disagreement to better yourself, to better the community, and to draw you closer to a solid relationship with God, versus you can't disagree here, so people walk out, and then they go into a community that goes, let's use your disagreement to make you full of yourself, or let's use your disagreement to help you learn how to better tear somebody apart, or let's use your... In other words, everyone's going to use the tool.
Yeah.
But how do we want to use that? And I would hope the church wouldn't want to abdicate its responsibility and its ability to be a healthy place to disagree.
I think one thing that I thought of when you mentioned this is something that I think has contributed to this, but I didn't realize it until this moment. Have you ever heard the phrase that, like, if you have enemies, good, it means you're doing something right? Right? The what we've done, not just how we use disagreement in our interactions with others, but how we use disagreements to determine our own path and our own correctness causes a lot of that as well. It causes a lot of problems, I think, too. And like the idea that if I have people that disagree with me or are pushing back against me, that it's a sign that I'm on the right path. Like, no. There are a lot of bad people in history that I can think of, and a lot of good people that I can think of that had enemies and had disagreements. And if you told them, good, that means you're on the right path, you would be endorsing genocide. You'd be endorsing dictatorships. You'd be endorsing murder. You'd be endorsing all of these
you need
things.
to analyze why.
Yeah, but that's what I'm saying. Some of these sayings that started with this intent to encourage and to build up and to motivate us to continue on, because there are times where you have enemies and you are on the right path, right? But if we just leave those sayings as is, they can cause more harm than good, because it encourages you one way or the other to entrench yourself further and ignore the voices of the enemies, and just take the fact that you have enemies as justification or proof that you're actually right.
Yeah, it kind of reminds me of this church member I had in a district that will remain nameless, but I remember they came up to me once and they were like, I went doing evangelism this weekend. And I said, well, that's good. And they go, I was persecuted for righteousness' sake.
Oh, no.
And I was like, I'm sorry, what? And they're like, well, I knocked on this door and this person introduced themselves as a particular persuasion. They're like, well, didn't you know that this leader in your organization is the Antichrist or whatever? And they're like, they slammed the door in my face. And I've been persecuted for righteousness' sake.
Yikes.
And I will admit, I was not the best pastor in that moment, and I spit out immediately. I was like, no, you were persecuted for being a jerk. And I had to learn to communicate that better. Yeah, I disagreed, but no, you have to learn to disagree better or communicate it in a way they'll understand. But no, that is my point. Disagreement is an opportunity for self-reflection, to better understand yourself and to better understand others. And if we use it for that, great. If we don't use it for that, you've missed the point, and it's going to do nothing but destruction.
I just want to add a little balance to my own view in that I do think a temptation right now, especially with social media, especially with all of the kind of wide view of injustice in the world, I think one temptation is to define your personality and purpose by disagreeing. I think that it's very easy to say, I'm against this, I'm against this, I'm against this, I'm against this, and be against all these different things. But I think the challenge for us is, what are we for? You know, you need to have both. You can't just be someone who tears things down. You also need to be willing to be a builder. And I think it's, if we don't have that, what we end up with is just a pile of rubble instead of building something useful.
Yeah.
And, you know, all of these things are really important and great, but we also have to think, you know, what is the end goal? What are the ideals we're striving for? And then how do we build a working something that makes those things possible?
Yeah.
Yeah, if you stay in the method of I find truth by rejecting something else, you will eventually run out of things to reject, and your world will just keep shrinking and shrinking and shrinking, and then you die. Internally, to community, to everything. If your way of finding truth is by embracing something, then your world can continually expand. It can continue to grow. It can continue to produce life. The great movements that we often think of as great disagreements, take even the Protestant Reformation, the protesting. It wasn't so much they were sitting there just pointing, that's bad. They were saying, no, this is right. Even take Martin Luther, for all of his problems, one of the key things we think is it wasn't him necessarily looking at the papal system and going, you stink. It was him going, no, look how beautiful is that I can go straight to Jesus, that his righteousness is all. He wanted to embrace something, and that caused a disagreement that caused someone to, one side wanted to embrace, the other side wanted to reject. And how did that turn out? We should ask ourselves that if we want to model the same methodology, how am I protesting? Am I protesting to accept, or am I protesting to reject? And usually if you're on the rejecting side, you're probably not on the right side of history, yet alone humanity.
Yeah, absolutely. So as we talk about disagreeing better, and I think I'd love your answers here on really what does disagreeing better look like, and I'll contribute my own first. That gives you time to ignore what I'm saying and think of your own answer. I hate like small groups where you're like, let's go around the circle and each share a story, because you're not listening to the person next to you. You're thinking of what you're going to say when it's your turn. For me, I think of, you said this early on, and as soon as you said it, I knew this was what I was going to say at the end of the show. You had said, if they're not for me, they're against me. And I think we need to shift instead to a different way of thinking of it, and it's the way that Jesus actually mentioned in a moment with his disciples, where they come and say, Jesus, there are these people doing things in your name, but like they're not us. They're not us. We need to stop them. And Jesus goes, why? If they're not against us, then they're with us. And that right there is, I think, the way, I think that should be the starting point almost, or a, initial point of contact that we go through, or a step we go through to say, like, are they really against us? Or I think in political discussions of wanting healthcare for people or wanting things, it's often that both sides want the same goal, but they disagree on how to get there, right? So it's not necessarily that they're against us, but rather we are for the same thing. How do we get there? And stopping to instead of regarding people as your enemy, instead of saying, what are the ways in which we can actually be with each other, and looking for the places to agree rather than the places to disagree, I think can make the biggest difference in the world just in your own approach to those conversations. So thoughts. You've had plenty of time, I hope. But how do you think we should be disagreeing better?
I think, as Henry said, learning to listen is key. Learning to listen not just to form your own response, but to pick out the things that are beneficial that you can learn is really, really important, and I think informs your disagreement. I think being able to understand what you're coming up against, not in order to fight it, but in order to say, overall, how can I contribute to the healthiest outcome here? How can I contribute to all of us growing and moving forward and becoming better as people and growing in our faith in a God of love? Step one, learning to listen. And I know that depending on who you are, there's some privilege associated with that. If you're a person who is being oppressed and harassed, and that's a different thing. I'm not telling anybody like make yourself unsafe in order to listen to the other side and the reasons of your abuser or something like that. I just mean that the more that you can understand about the situation, the more informed you're going to be on how to make it better.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I would definitely say when it comes to disagreement, disagree to understand, not disagree to undermine.
Yeah.
Too
Tweet
many.
that.
Yeah, I should if I had spent more time on Twitter. The point is, yeah,
Facebook it.
Yeah,
Instagram it.
whatever. Yeah, I mean, no, but the point is, too many times we approach disagreement as this is the moment I must resolve something or I must prove something. Instead of realizing we're too impatient. We think everything has to be done in 2 minutes or less. We're kind of in this fast food culture of instantaneous, well, this disagreement must be resolved right now, and they must reach my side or I must dispose of them and move on or whatever. And we don't view it as a means to an end instead of the end of the end, right? I view a disagreement as the end. We're either going to fix this now or we're done. And I've learned a lot more productivity in life, a lot more beautiful experiences. And when I go, all right, disagreement is my first step to understand. And I might have to disagree 2 years in a row to reach a point where the resolution can come, right? And we miss beautiful relationships, we miss understanding, we miss good outcomes because it has to be done now.
Yeah.
Well, no, it doesn't have to be done now. It can be done later. Stop worrying about the end. Start worrying about the now. Sounds very Zen-like, but, right, disagree to understand. Don't disagree to undermine.
As soon as an argument becomes a competition for value, something that you win or lose, that's the sign for me that you're not doing this well. As soon as it's I have to win no matter what, or my argument is about me being a better person than you, that's the signal that we're disagreeing poorly and in an unhealthy way.
I think we've hit on some amazing points, and I am really grateful for this conversation. I disagree with everything you've said, but I do appreciate you both and sharing what you've thought, and I just think you're wrong. But no, thank you guys both for sharing your thoughts, sharing some personal experiences as well. I very much appreciate it. And to our listeners, I hope that this has given you something that you can take back with you, that you can apply even immediately, maybe in conversation with friends, family, or on social media. But thank you so much for listening. Reach out to us, leave a comment, leave a review. We appreciate all the feedback that we get from listeners. Thank you so much. We'll see you next time. Thank you so much for listening to Echo and for being on this journey with us. If you're watching on YouTube, we hope that you'll leave a comment, subscribe, hit that like button. If you're listening on iTunes, Spotify, or whatever podcatching app that you like the most, we hope that you'll hit that subscribe button, that you'll leave a review, and that you'll engage with us. And also for more content from Project Refresh that's like Echo and some of the other shows that we host, then head on over to theprojectrefresh.org. Thank you so much for your support. It means the world to us, and we'll see you next week.
This episode of the Echo Podcast is sponsored by Southern Adventist University.